back. This is Krishna again, and welcome to my YouTube channel, AI Martian. So today we will talk about casting. Okay, so what kind of casting? What are the agenda we have today, and what kind of interview question the interviewer can ask regarding casting only? Okay, so I just thought to start videos or any concept in which I will introduce agenda first, then I will also introduce interview questions, so you guys will able to crack any interview if you'll get in future. So just stick with me, stay tuned with this channel, okay, and you will definitely grab a good job for sure, okay, because I'm working in industry, so I know what kind of question we ask to candidate when we go to hire them, okay. So let's start. Let's go to Google Collab Sheet, and I will share you each and everything stepwise and code wise also, okay. So let's start. We are talking about our 14th videos of deep learning series, where we will talk about casting, okay, where we'll talk about casting data type in TensorFlow, like how can we convert one data type to another data type, okay, called casting, okay, conversion of one data type into another data type called casting, okay. So we have subdivisions also here. I mentioned like 1.1, okay, where I mentioned casting tensor to define data types, where we have a further division like casting toward different numeric type, that is float to int. So I will go through them one by one, okay. So this is our agenda basically, okay. So I mentioned everything here. I will go through this whole points one by one, and I will definitely hope that you guys will like this, okay. Please comment me if you like this. Thank you guys. Let's start the very first point, which is casting. So the very first point we have is casting data type in TensorFlow. So what is casting? Okay, so first of all, we will talk about what is casting. So our question is like, what is casting? Okay, so in Python, I already taught you guys like casting is a kind of process in which we convert one data type into another data type. Let me give you one example on this. So let's say this is a variable a which contains certain value, let's say 1, okay, and this one is what, a data type called int or integer, you can say integer, okay. So this is an integer data type, okay. Now I want to convert this data type into, let's say, float data type. So how can I do this? I have to simply do some process like there is a float constructor we have in Python. So I will pass this a to this float constructor, and I will store it inside a variable called b, and I will print that b, okay. So if I will print that b, I will get a float value which is look something like this, 1.0. 1 point, this is 1 guys, 1.0. so this is what, this is integer, and now this is float. Similarly, same operation we can perform on TensorFlow, okay. But how can we do this? So in this sequence, I will teach you about the same, okay, about these concept only and their interview questions, okay. So stick with me guys, let's start. So first of all, I want to mention like what is casting. So a very simple definition I want to introduce here. Casting is a process in which a user convert one data type into another data type. Very simple guys. Like example, you can say example, like let's say conversion of integer value to float value, okay, float to int value or integer value, okay, and so on. So this is basically called casting. So let me demonstrate you these things, okay. So I will show you one by one. Let me make it a little bit prettier. Yeah. So conversion of integer value to float value, float to integer. So some sort of casting are there. I will show you each and everything because that is mentioned in our agenda there. So let's go to subdivision 1.1. Okay, so it is mentioning here 1.1 casting tensor to different data type. So I'm just picking all the values, like their subdivision also, like this is 1.1 where we have casting tensor to different data type, but it has 4 subdivision which I have mentioned here. Okay, so I'm talking about a subdivision. Okay, let me put it here, Control M. Okay, so now what I have to do, I have to cast a float tensor to integer. So first of all, I required a float tensor. Okay, so let's import a TensorFlow. So import TensorFlow as TF. Okay, because we are going to create a tensor, so I'm importing TensorFlow as TF. Okay, so I can use this TF alias to create tensor. So the very first agenda is casting to a different number type, that is float to int. So I'm talking here about float to integer conversion of tensor because we are talking about TensorFlow. So this is our agenda number 1.1.1. Okay, so let me comment it, and I'm creating a variable, let's say a, where I will create some float value, let's say 1.2 or 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Okay, so some sort of value I'm mentioning. You can also mention data type, which is tf dot float 16 I'm using. Okay, so inside variable a I stored a tensor which contain 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 inside it, and I'm storing it inside a container called a. I want to see whether this tensor is created properly or not. So in that case, I simply have to print a and shift enter I have to hit. So once I hit shift enter, I'm getting a tensor here, okay, which contain 1.2.3 point, and where is 0? I talked about it in the last video. So please go through my playlist, because if you're not going through my playlist, if you are doing wildcard entry here, so definitely you will not able to understand multiple concepts. Okay, so I would request you to go through the whole playlist, okay, from the start, and you will definitely get aware with it. So now I want to convert it into integer. Okay, so how can I convert it into integer? So this conversion is called casting of float tensor into integer. So interviewer can ask you like, what is casting? So in that case, you have to tell them like, the casting is conversion of one data type into another data. This is called casting. Okay, so I'm casting this into integer, means I just want a value something like this. The value which I will get after doing casting will look something like this: 1, 2, 3. This is our new tensor. Okay, once I will perform the casting operation, because I'm trying to convert float into integer. Okay, so let's perform it. This is my output which I will get finally after doing all the operations. So let's keep it down below. Okay, and I will write my code here. So tf dot cast I have to use. So there is a predefined function we have called cast, and I have to pass my variable, which is a. A is a variable which contain this float tensor, which I have to pass here. I passed it here. Okay, and I have to define the d type, which is tf dot, and I have to mention int 8, int 16, int 32. Okay, some sort of data type we have given. So this is int 8, int 16, int 32. Okay, so as the number increases in this int 16, int 32, okay, int 64, that means the memory size will increase. Okay, so it's all the part of data structure. I will let you know but a little bit about it. So let me tell you what is so int 8, int 16, int 32, int 64. This is nothing but the memory. Okay, so see what happened. We have 1 2 3 values here, okay, or 1 2 3 values here, okay. So I want to store these values in some memory location, which have some slot, okay. So how many square are there? So let's count 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Okay, so this is called int 8. Okay, why int 8? Because I want to convert this, or let's say I'm taking another example. Let's say this is 10. Okay, I want to convert this 10, which is a decimal number. If you are not aware with this, please go through my Python playlist. I mentioned there about decimal number, binary number, octal number, hexadecimal number, everything. Okay, so this is decimal number, which we use in our day-to-day life for counting, are called decimal number. Okay, so I'm converting this decimal number into binary number. Once I will convert it into binary number, I will get some sort of value, because binary number always use 0 and 1. Okay, so I convert this 10 into binary number, okay, which is 1010. Now, what are the operations that I already mentioned in the Python playlist? So please go through my Python playlist, okay? And now, suppose I want to store this somewhere in a memory set, okay? So this is a memory kind of a storage, you can say. Here I will start filling this value from left to right, okay? This is my right side, this is my left side, okay? So from left to right, I will store the value. So 0 will placed here at 8 index, 1 will place here at 7 index, 0 again store at 6 index, and 1 store at 5th index. So what about the remaining square? We have to simply put 0. And see, if you will put here 0, that means it is a positive value. Okay, if you will put here 1, this is actually for a sign. Okay, like what kind of value you have, either it is a positive value or a negative value. So for that, this for a first box we used. Okay, 0 means positive value, means the whole value from here to here. These are positive value. That's why we are using 0 here. Positive value. And 1 means if I will place here 1 instead of 0, so that means the whole value should be negative value. All right. So keep this thing in mind. Now, similarly, I want to store the whole value into some memory. So for that, I need a storage. Okay, and here I'm using int 16, but I would recommend you to use int 32. Okay, why? Because that's a float value. Okay, let me, and float value actually use a lot of memory, otherwise it will show you some error there. Okay, but you can also go with int 16, no problem. Let me use it, int 16. And let's say I'm storing it inside a variable called a result, and I'm printing this result. Okay, so I will get integer tensor of this tensor, this float tensor. Okay, so let's hit shift and enter. See, I'm getting 1 2 3 4 into 16. Okay, so it's simply a kind of data structure stuff. Okay, where in data structure we learn how to manage our data, what kind of data type we should use for efficient kind of processing. Okay, so such kind of key feature data structure teachers. Okay, I will also start a playlist on data structure, so don't worry, it will definitely come soon. All right, so let's move to our next point. So finally I got the same output 1 2 3. See, I'm getting 1 2 3. So I'm starting the second point. Okay, let's see. So second point is casting to different numeric type to int to float. Now this time I want to convert integer to float. Okay, let me put a heading here. I'm again creating a tensor, tf dot variable, and that tensor will be integer. Okay, now data type I'm going to define tf dot int 8 I will use. Okay, and I will print this value just to see whether it is working fine or not. So see, I'm getting a tensor where I have 1 2 3 value, okay, in the form of tensor. There is no point, there is no double quote, single quote like a string, okay. So keep these thing in mind, okay. Now I want to cast the integer tensor into float tensor, okay. So how can we do this? Again, we have tf dot cast function in TensorFlow, which I will use, and I will pass my variable b, which I want to convert it into float. So b is the int tensor, and I want to convert this b into float tensor. So I have to mention here d type is equal to tf dot float 32, okay. Now I want to store it inside again in a result, okay. So I will print this result, and what I'm expecting, the output which I'm expecting right now is, it will look something like this. Let's say 1.2.3 point. So let's see whether I'm getting it or not. Shift enter. See, I'm getting this tensor. See, so this is our tensor, okay, in which we are getting all the values, but these values are in the form of float. Now see, the data type here, it is mentioned float 32, okay. Let's move to the third point, which is casting Boolean value to numeric. So what is casting of a Boolean value? So first of all, we have to understand like what is Boolean value. So Python Boolean data type. In Python, it is called bool data type, okay. So keep this thing in mind. So now I want to show you what is Boolean value. So there is a constructor in Python called bool, okay. If I will pass, let's say 1, okay, and I will print this, or let me store it in some variable. Let's say I'm using p is equal to, and I'm printing this p. So what do you think? What will I get? Here I will get true, okay. Let's run. See, I'm getting true. So what does that mean? So let me show you one more Boolean value, okay. So this time I am using again bool parenthesis, and I will pass 0, okay, and I will store it inside a variable called c, and I will print c. What kind of output I'm expecting here? So the answer is false. Now I want to tell you why I'm getting true and false. So see, Boolean always talk about two cases, you can say. The first one is true, and the second one is false. What does that mean? So Boolean said, suppose a person have one candy, okay, and there is one more person having 0 candy. So if I will ask Boolean data type, like Boolean, can you please tell me how many candies the first person have? So Boolean will not say one candy, it will say true. He has candy only. He will not tell about the magnitude. He will simply say true. Whereas on the other hand, if you will ask to Boolean, Boolean will say it has no candy, and no means false. It has no candy, false, it has nothing, okay. So only about these two scenario it say like true or false, okay. So similarly, there is one more question. What if I have 10 candy here? So in that case, again the Boolean value will say true. I will say yes, it will say true. It will not talk about the magnitude, it will always talk about the scenario which is happening or not happening, okay. So here he has chocolate, the means the scenario he is fulfilling. He has something, means some weight. Now what is weight? Weight means something must be happened, okay. And here person has no weight, nothing, okay. So that's why it is saying false, okay. So this is the scenario. What if a person will say I have minus 100 candy? In that case also the Boolean will say true, because Boolean means there is some magnitude. whether that magnitude is in negative side, but still there are some magnitude, so that's why it will return true, not false. Okay, so don't think about it. If there is a negative value, it will say false. No, it will say true. It will only say false only where there is nothing, like 0.0. This is a float value. If in float I will mention 0.0, I will get false. In integer, if I will say 0, it will false. If I will say, let's say none is a Python predefined keyword. Okay, so it will say false. If I will say empty string where there is no space, also there is no space, okay, nothing, so this is false. In double quote there is no space, it will be false. A list having no element, false. A tuple having no element, false. A dictionary having no element, false. Okay, so in these scenario our boolean will simply say false. Okay, so what if we have some sort of value like 0.01? True, this is true because it has some weight. And this is 10. True, this is false. Okay, because none is nothing. Okay, none means nothing. Okay, if I will mention let's say a here, it will be true. If I'll mention here again a, it will be true. If I'll mention here 1, it will be true. If I'll mention here 1, it will be true. If I'll mention here any value, let's say 10, true. Okay, if I'll mention here 10, true. If I'll mention here 10, true, means there is some values. Okay, so I'm coming back to our topic again. So let me clear this. So I was talking about like what if I will cast a boolean to numeric, what will happen? So simply I want to create a boolean tensor. So I will mention tf dot variable, and inside this variable I will mention true. This is Python keyword also. True means 1. Okay, simple. True means 1. False means 0. False. True. True. Okay, so in this tensor we have 4 elements. Okay, 4 elements. First one is true, second one is false, third one is true, and fourth one is also true. Okay, and I will simply store it inside a variable a, and I will show you to print this value whether I'm getting a tensor or not. So see, I'm getting a tensor here. Okay, I'm getting a tensor here. See, tf dot variable, using variable I created this tensor, and there are 4 elements inside the tensor and dimension is 1. That's why in this shape tuple I'm getting only single element whose magnitude is 4. That means 4 elements. This data type is boolean. It is that tensor which I created here. Okay, the same tensor I'm getting. Now I want to convert this tensor into number. Number means what? Integer. Okay, integer or float. So I'm going to convert it into integer. Okay, so how can I do this? So simply I have to mention tf dot cast, and I have to pass. Let me use the same shell. tf dot casting boolean to integer. Okay, so tf dot cast, I will pass a. A is our boolean tensor. Okay, so I will pass a, and here I will pass d type is equal to int 8. Okay, I forget to mention tf dot int 8. Okay, let me store it inside a variable called b, and I will print this b. See, I'm getting 1 0 1 1. Let relate this thing. So here I was getting true on 0 index, on 1 index I was getting false, right? On 2 index I was getting true, on 3 index I was getting true. So similarly here we have 0 index, 1 index, 2 index, and 3 index, right? Because we have 4 elements here, and indexing always start from 0. So true means what? 1. False means 0. True means again 1, and false means, sorry, true means 1. So here in the same sequence, sequence has not been changed. Okay, it 1 0 1 1. Okay, so 1 0 1 1 I'm getting. See, so this is nothing but the conversion of Boolean data type to integer, okay, on tensor, because we all are doing this operation on tensor, so that's why I mentioned tensor. Okay, so hope you guys understand this. Now let's move to the next part. What if I want to convert it into float? What if I will convert into float? So let's cast or casting Boolean to float data type or float tensor. Okay, float tensor. In that case, I will simply use this A, which is I already defined a Boolean tensor which has contained 4 elements: true, false, true, true. Okay, so I will simply mention what I will convert this into float. So I will use cast again, and I will pass my A tensor, and I will mention here D type is equal to TF dot float 16. Okay, and I will store it inside again a B variable, and I will print B. So see, this time I will get float values here. Okay, this time I will get 1.0.1.1. See, here I was getting 1 0 1 1, but now because this was a integer data type, this is a float data type, and that's why I'm getting point here. Okay, in this scenario, so this is the conversion of Boolean into float tensor, and this is the conversion of Boolean to int tensor. Okay, so hope you guys understand this. Let's move to a next point, which is casting numeric to Boolean. Casting numeric to Boolean. So what does that mean? Vice versa. Okay, I just converted Boolean to integer and float. Now just opposite of these two operations I have to perform in this case, because here I mentioned casting numeric to Boolean. Now, numeric means int and float both. Okay, so I am simply going to create a tensor once again, which contain integer values. So here I want to demonstrate you casting of integer tensor into Boolean tensor. Okay, so let me introduce some values here. Okay, 1 1. Okay, now you guys will ask me, sir, is it mandatory to mention 0 1 0 1 only? I will say no, you can mention anything. I suppose I'm mentioning here 10. Okay, I'm mentioning here 12. Okay, so no problem, it will simply return once I will convert this numerical tensor, integer tensor, into Boolean tensor. The Boolean will simply return for this true, for this false, for this true, and for this false. Okay, so what kind of output I'm expecting? I will show you. True for 1. Okay, for 0 it will return false. For 12 it will return true again, and for 10 it will return true. Okay, so let's convert it into Boolean. Okay, so TF dot, I have to mention here casting to Boolean. Okay, so I will mention TF dot cast. I have to mention here A, and D type is equal to TF dot bull. Okay, and I will store it inside a variable called B. I will print that variable B. Oh, my bad, I'm sorry, this is B. Okay, and see what I'm getting on the screen. I'm getting true, false, true, true, which is nothing but the scenario which I has mentioned here is the same. Okay, see, you can relate them. Okay, because here on 0th index we are getting some weight, that is 1, and that's why I'm getting true. On 0th on 1 index I'm getting 0, that means false, so it is returning false. On second index On second index, I'm getting some value, so it is true. And on third index, I'm mentioning 10. That means also has some weight. That means it is true. Okay. So this is the all operation I performed so far. Let's move to next point. I'm cleaning the window. Now I have casting with compatibility check. Okay. Now what it is? Let's see. Casting with compatibility check. All right, guys. So casting with compatibility check means I just want to tell you a story about it. Let's see. Suppose you have three toys. Okay. Toys. Okay. First one is rectangular, second one is square, and third one is circular. Okay. Now I want to ask you to fit these toy into square shape structure. Means you have to fit this into square shape structure kind of slot. So once I will try to do this, I will definitely have to destruct the shape of this toy, but this is compatible. This may be compatible or maybe not. It's totally depend on its diameter or radius. So simply what happened, what does this mean? This means if I will create a tensor, let's say 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, which is nothing but a float tensor. If somebody will ask me, Krishna, cast this or change it, cast means conversion, okay? Cast it into integer. What will happen in that case? So once I will try to change this into integer, I will get some sort of values. So what happened in this case? In this case, some data loss happened, okay? But our data simply get transformed into integer. So this is called compatibility check, whether this particular tensor is compatible to convert it into integer or not. We have to check. This is simply the casting with compatibility check. Okay, there is nothing more than this in this case. Okay, so let me show you this. Let me take one example. Okay, so the example is, let me create a tensor again, variable, and I have to put some values here. Let's say 1.1, 1.2, 3.1, and I'm mentioning here D type. It's a good practice. Okay, so I would recommend you all guys to also use this. Well, TensorFlow take care about these kind of things. Okay, so if you will not mention that, also fine, but I would request you to mention this because it is a good practice to mention data type. So tf dot float, let's say 32 I'm mentioning here. Okay, and if I will print a, I will get the same values. Okay, no problem. I basically missed E here. See, I'm getting the output. Here I'm getting that tensor in which 1.1.2, 3.1 it is mentioned. Okay. If you guys want, you guys can mention the name also of this tensor. That is acceptable here. Okay. So let me check. Let me mention. I can mention here compatibility check. I'm doing, I can mention the name. It is nothing doing here. It is simply for debugging. Means once you will mention a lot of tensors and you want to identify them by specific name, you can mention this. There is nothing more use than this. Okay, in any tensor you can mention this. Okay, so see, you are just getting one name here, compatibility check. Okay, all right. Now if I will cast it into integer, I will definitely lose some data because integer never contain points value. Okay, means whatever output I will get here will look something like this to you, 1 comma 2 comma 3. Okay, the point value will discard by this int or integer. Okay, so let me show you the operations. TF dot casting, we already performed this operation above. So I'm simply mentioning here a, and I'm converting it into data type TF dot int 32, let's say. Okay, I'm storing it inside a variable called, let's say, result. All right, and I'm printing a result, and I will get this kind of output. Okay, this kind of output. Let me run this, shift enter. See, I'm getting this kind of output. So it simply discard all points value. Okay, all right, so this is nothing but we are checking whether it is convertible into float to integer or not. Okay, that's why this concept being introduced by me. All right, so this is nothing but we are simply checking whether a tensor is convertible from one data type to another data type or not. Okay, in TensorFlow. Now let's move to the third point. So we just completed this. Now I want to explain about interview questions. Okay, so let me copy these two first. So interview questions I'm talking now. Okay, so what kind of interview question we can get on casting? Like what kind of interview question an interviewer can ask me? So they will ask, first of all, what is casting in TensorFlow and why it is important. So the answer of this question is, I have already mentioned here the answer of this question. So I'm mentioning here, it's just for the interview purpose. Okay, so no need to worry like you guys have to memorize this. No, there is nothing like that. But if you guys want to go for any interview, let's say, so it is good to have such kind of question answer with you. Okay, so you guys will able to understand the questions of interviewer very well. Okay, so the answer of very first question here, what is casting in TensorFlow and why it is important? You can simply say that casting in TensorFlow refers to converting tensor from one data type to another. I said this thing initially. Casting means converting one data type to another data type, right? But we are talking about tensor, right? So that's why this TensorFlow and tensor came in picture. All right, so casting is the same everywhere. All right, the concept will never change, but in which library or for what kind of operation you are using casting, you have to mention that. So if interviewer will ask you what is casting in TensorFlow, then you have to say in that case, casting in TensorFlow refers to converting tensors from one data type to another data type. Now, what next? It is important. Why it is important? They ask, right? If I'm converting this from integer to float, why it is important? Okay, why it is important to convert like this? What is the use? Okay, an interviewer can ask, right? So that's why I introduced this question as well. So the second question answer is, it is important for ensuring compatibility between tensors, optimizing performance, and preparing data for operations that require specific types. Suppose, what does that mean? It is quite complicated. So it simply means, suppose you want to multiply two values. If you are multiplying them 2 into 3, you will get 6. That is fine, no problem. Okay, that is absolutely fine. If it is a tensor and I'm doing broadcasting, I already taught you about broadcasting in the previous video. Please go through the playlist. Okay, so this is a tensor, let's say now, and I'm multiplying this tensor with 3. I will get not 6 this time. I will get within square bracket 6. Okay, so think about it. If I will divide the same value, if I will divide the same value by 3, I will get 0.66667, some sort of values I will get. All right, now if anyhow I'm not able to convert it into, let's say, float, okay, so I will not get this value. I will lose this data. So casting is, that's why important. So internally, when you divide it by 3, Python itself do some casting operation on this and convert the value into float, because it is an integer. It is an integer. If you will divide 2 integer, you will definitely get integer, but you are getting float. So what is that? This is the example, perfect example of casting, which is done by TensorFlow or Python itself. Okay. So that's why casting is important. Otherwise, if you will not able to do casting, we will definitely not will get this answer, because we have 2 integer, and if you will multiply 2 integer together, you will get an integer value. This is integer data type. These two are also integer. So why, when we are dividing 2 to 3, 2 integer value, why we are getting 0.66667? Why we are not getting 0? We must get a integer value, right? But we are getting float value. So internally, Python do some sort of casting internally, okay, and throwing us the value that is 0. Okay, so when this operation, this division functionality created by Python developer or TensorFlow developer, they basically perform casting operation on its own. Okay, so this is a kind of a reference you can throw in front of interviewer, so he will definitely get convinced. Okay, now let's move to the next topic. Let's say this is our second question. It's a coding kind of question. Basically, the interviewer is asking you to do some code, okay? So it's a coding question, okay, where you have to perform some coding operation. So what the question is talking about, how do you cast a tensor from float 32 to int 32 in TensorFlow? So first of all, I have to create first step. Let's create a step here. Step 1, create a float 32 tensor, which create a float 32 tensor. Okay, so how can we create? So let's create variable, and I'm storing it inside a variable called a, and I'm simply creating a float okay, tensor. All right, and I want to convert it into, okay, what is the data type of this? So they said float 32, so you have to mention float 32 in your code. Okay, so what is a float 32? So d type is equal to tf dot float 32. Always keep this thing in mind. Okay, so one more thing, guys, I forget to mention here tf dot. Of course, we are using TensorFlow, so, and variable is the functionality of TensorFlow. So I have to use tf dot variable and parenthesis. I have to pass my floating tensor. Okay, and I have to define data type float 32, because they ask float 32, is it convertible to int 32? So I have to create first a tensor with a data type float 32, and I have to see whether it is creatable or not. So see, I can create it, right? Now I want to convert it into step 2. Step 2, convert float 32 tensor to int 32 tensor. That was our question. See, int 32. Okay, here we have int 32. Okay, tensor. So yes, we can convert it. How? So I have to simply mention tf dot cast, because I'm converting float to int. So I have to mention that tensor, which is a, and I have to mention here tf dot sorry, first of all I have to mention d type is equal to tf dot int 32, and you will definitely not get a Google Colab kind of editor there. Okay, so you have to memorize this thing, like there is flow int 8, int 16, int 32, okay, available. Okay, so once you do a lot of coding on this, you will definitely able to understand it. Okay, and keep this thing in your mind. So I'm simply storing it inside a variable called result after converting from float to int 32, and let's see whether I'm getting the output or not. And see, I'm getting the output. So this is your second interview question, which you have to answer on code base. Okay, like you have to provide them specific code, like this kind of coding we can perform to get execute what you have asked. Okay, now let's move to third question. Question is, what happened if you cast a Boolean tensor to an integer type? Okay, it's simply asking you to convert a Boolean tensor to an integer type. So how can you do this? Again, this is a coding question. So let's see how can we perform this. So step first. Always try to break your question into steps, so you guys will definitely able to rectify those problems which you will get in the interviews. Okay, because mostly what happened, people start thinking about the end output. So that is not the proper way to solve any coding question. You have to break down into small pieces in your mind, and then you have to execute them accordingly. Otherwise, you will not get output. You will definitely make some mistake. So that's why I'm mentioning your step. Okay. But if you'll start doing coding on your own, definitely you will be hands-on on such kind of thing, and you do not have to mention step 1, step 2, step 3, because that all operation already visualize in your mind automatically. All right. So step 1 I'm mentioning here, creating a Boolean tensor, a Boolean tensor. Okay, because here we have casting a Boolean tensor. So first of all, we have to create a Boolean tensor. So create a Boolean tensor. A is equal to tf dot variable and I have to mention a Boolean tensor there. So true, false, and this is case sensitive, means if I'm mentioning here true letter T is capital, so it must be capital. You cannot mention it small, otherwise it will wrong. Okay, so I'm mentioning 3 values inside it, and let's run this. Let's see whether I'm getting that tensor or not. So yes, I'm getting a Boolean tensor. See, the data type is Boolean. Okay, so now step 2. Step 2. What is step 2? Step 2 is to an integer type, means cast a Boolean tensor. So I create a Boolean tensor. Now what I have to do, I have to cast that Boolean tensor into integer type. Okay, so let's perform this. Cast Boolean tensor to integer data type. All right, so data type. So let me mention tf dot cast and a there, and I have to mention d type int tf dot int 8, let's say. Okay, and I'm storing it inside a variable called result once again, and print result will give you the output. So this is true means 1, this is true means 1, this is false means 0. Let me use my marker. So this is true means 1, this is true means 1, this is false means 0. So I will get some sort of tensor, and see, I'm getting that. So it is possible. So whatever interviewer asked to you, you can solve using this way. All right. Let me show you the question. So what happened if you cast a Boolean tensor to an integer tensor? So there are 2 ways using which you can cast it. Means 2 steps. There are 2 steps using which you can cast a Boolean tensor into integer. Okay. Now let's move to next question. Okay, so the next question is, can you explain difference between implicit and explicit casting? Let's see. can you explain the difference between implicit and explicit casting in TensorFlow? So what does that mean? First of all, we will talk about implicit and explicit casting. Okay. So what is implicit and what is explicit? Okay. Intentionally, so first of all, we will talk about implicit. What is implicit? So when casting done by TensorFlow internally without human intervention, without our intervention, without our motive, if it is happening behind the scene by tensor itself, that is called implicit casting. Okay, that is called implicit casting. Okay, where we are not doing any kind of casting operation, we are not doing any kind of casting operation called implicit casting. All right, whereas what is explicit casting? Explicit casting, when casting done by human or user needs. Okay, or when user perform any kind of casting according to their requirement, that is called explicit casting. Okay, so there are two kind of casting we have: implicit casting and explicit casting. Implicit casting, in which we do not cast any tensor from one data type to another data type, whereas in explicit casting we intentionally convert one data type to another data type. All right, so let's see what is implicit casting. Okay, so let's say I'm mentioning implicit casting. Okay, so I'm creating a tensor tf dot variable where I will mention, let's say 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4, and d type I will mention tf dot int 32. Okay, and I have a value b which is 2. All right, I simply want to add a to b. Okay, and if I will print the result, it will simply do what? Like in this case, it will simply convert all the values. It will simply convert, it will simply create this tensor by adding so what will happen in this scenario? This 2 will get add with each element, which is called broadcasting, and its data type will be intact. Okay, so internally once it will add to this tensor, the data type of this will be same like this one. Okay, so this is called implicit casting. In this TensorFlow internally do such kind of casting. Okay, we are not providing any kind of data type here. You can see this, right? So let's run this and see. We are getting this 1 plus 2 will become 3, this 2 plus 2 become 4, this 3 plus 2 become 5, this 4 plus 2 become 6. Okay, and data type is still intact. See, and this is the output. So this is called implicit casting, means the data type of this didn't get changed, but once I perform the broadcasting operation after adding b to this particular tensor, I am simply getting the same data type because of intrinsic, because of implicit casting. Okay, it happened internally. Okay, I do not provide any kind of data type to this. Okay, so it internally happened. So this is called implicit casting. Okay, explicit casting, we already have seen a lot of explicit casting so far. We cast a lot of data type. Okay, let me mention explicit casting. Okay, suppose I have a data type, suppose I have a tensor tf dot variable. I will mention 1.2 or 1, 2, 3, 4. Data type is tf dot int 32. Okay. And I will create one more tf dot variable. Okay. And I have to mention, let's say 7890. Okay. And I have to provide the same data type to perform this operation. So that is int 32. Int 32. The same like the above one. Okay. So I have to cast it. Okay. I have to cast in the same data type. Then only I'm able to get the answer. Otherwise, I was not able to get the answer because I have to cast it in the same data type. If anyhow, if I will cast to int 64, it will give me an error. See, I'm getting error. Okay, because their data type are not same. Okay, and that's why it is not able to add these two values. Okay, so you have to keep this thing in mind when you cast any data type intentionally. That is called explicit casting. And where the TensorFlow perform casting on its own, that's called implicit casting. Okay, so this is explicit casting. I got the output. This is the output, and this is implicit casting. Okay, so hope you guys understand this concept. Let's move to the next question. What are some potential issues that can arise when casting data type in TensorFlow? So this is also a kind of very important question we get in the interview. Interviewer asks most of the time, because of terminology we get confused most of the time, and that's why I tackle this problem also. So what are some potential issues that can arise when casting data type in TensorFlow? So first of all, data loss. Okay, data loss happened, and that's the major problem in casting. Okay, I already thought about it, but let me show you once again. Remember, I created a tensor of float data type, and I want to cast into integer. Cast this float into integer. Cast tensor A, which is float, into integer. So what will happen? So if I will do casting of A into int, d type is equal to tf dot int 16, it will simply lose the data. What kind of data it will lose? It will lose all the values after point, because integer never contain points value. It will simply give you 1, 3, 2. See, 1, 3, 2. It simply lose the data, okay, after point, because integer never contain point value. So this is the major problem of casting. All right, guys. So this is all about the aggregation operation in Tensor. So hope you like this video. If you like this, please do like, share, subscribe, and share with your friend, family. And thank you very much. Thank you, and have a nice day.